Well, welcome to the latest episode of There's That. We are two chicks with questions, and we are ready to tackle another conversation that disrupts our leadership in the very best way. My name is Gina McLean, and I'm excited to be here with you guys. Listen, before we dive in fact, before you get to hear from my amazing partner in crime, I just want to make a special ask on behalf of Cindy and I. If these conversations are helpful to you, if you're getting something out of these conversations as we navigate them each week, then we just want to encourage you. Would you subscribe? If you're on the YouTube channel, just slip over and just hit that subscribe button. Whatever form you are watching this video or this vodcast in, subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, because I promise there's more coming. So now, back to this week's episode, I get to introduce my partner in crime, actually probably one of my favorite people on the planet, Cindy Fiala. Cindy, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Gina?
I'm good. Because we're doing this today, so I'm always good when we get to do these.
This is a really fun part of our week, isn't it?
Isn't it? I know.
We get to talk to some really fun people and interesting people, and today is just going to be an amazing conversation. We have two of my favorite people on the planet here with us today, Jim Johnson and Paul Basden, or as their friends like to call them, PB and J. So I just had to throw that out there. Man, we're going to talk about a book that they wrote. This came out, I think, last year in 2019. It's called Tough Stuff Parenting. This, if you don't have this book on your shelf, if you are in ministry, if you're a parent, if you know parents, if you're a grandparent, you need to have this on your bookshelf. Really important conversations. And so we're going to talk about some of those today as it pertains to those people who are in ministry. So this might get interesting, and it's going to be good for sure. So right now, I'd love to introduce you to my friends Jim and Paul. Hey, Paul, why don't we start with you first? Would you just give us a little lowdown about Paul Basden?
You bet. Thank you, Gina and Cindy, for having us. It's great to be with you guys and with all those who are listening. I was born in Dallas, left Dallas when I was a kid, moved to Richmond, Virginia, came back to Texas as fast as I could, went to Baylor University, met my sweet little wife, Denise, there. We've been married 42.5 years. It's amazing that she has put up with me. Love Denise so much. She's a missionary kid that grew up in Indonesia and is the most emotionally and socially whole human I know. She's probably the reason that I'm not in jail for trying to do who knows how many things. I just love her. She's wonderful. Jim and Robin know her too. Got two girls, Carrie and Kristen. Carrie's 39. She's married to Jared. She's got 4 little boys. I call them the Lost Boys from Peter Pan, because when you walk into the house, you either get tripped or hit or kicked, then they do a somersault, then they watch a YouTube video, then they go out and play soccer, then they come back in, and then they hit you and trip you again, and then they are happy to have you read to them before they go to bed. They're just boys with testosterone, 10, 8, 6, and 1, and we love them. Kristen is our 34-year-old daughter. She loves sports as much as I do. I'm a Cowboys fan. I'm a Baylor Bears fan. I'm a Texas Rangers fan. I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan. In music, I love classic rock off the chart. I love classic jazz. Just finished watching that it's probably 20 years old now, the Ken Burns special on jazz. So good. And that's COVID watching, by the way. And then I also, while I don't like country music, please don't turn off the podcast if you love country music. I'm sorry. I'm slowly reforming. But I watched that Ken Burns special on country music, and I have to tell you, I got teary 3 times. It was so powerful, because I know that is exactly what my grandparents and my great-grandparents on both sides, in North Georgia, in North Alabama, and West and East Tennessee, watched. That's what they played and listened to on their porches and in their neighborhoods and in their hollers, because that's the kind of family I came out of. So I like that a little bit as well. Love working with Jim Johnson, the best ministry experience of my whole career. I'm a better man because of his friendship. And that's enough. Mexican food, margaritas, I don't know what else to tell you.
That was probably going to be one of our questions at the end, so we'll ask it again.
Well, I was actually answering that for my wife, Denise, but I can also tell.
That's awesome. Thanks, Paul. Hey, Jim, fill us in on all things Jim Johnson.
Well, I am like Paul. I'm a native Texan. I grew up in Midland, Texas, and played high school football in the home of Friday Night Lights against Odessa Permian. So when if you've read that book or watched that series, that's the place I grew up, and that impacted me a lot. I got married while I was in college to Robin Archinall. Her dad actually had a children's television show in Midland when I was growing up, so I knew all about her and her family. Had a chance meeting with her while I was in college. We got married the summer after my junior year and after her sophomore year. And I tell people this is a ministry kind of group. I tell people I had a lot of sex in college, but a perfectly clean conscience. It was awesome. And so it was great. She actually was a news broadcaster. She did local news. Actually got to the point when we were in Atlanta, she did news for Headline News. And so she's had a career outside the home, but she never worked full time. She was good enough at what she did. She can kind of name her hours. And she was is an incredible mom and just loved spending time with our boys. We raised 3 sons. Our oldest is living in State College as a law professor at Penn State. He's married to Beth Ann. And the most important thing is they have our 3 grandkids, Lorian, who is age 6, Muriel, who is age 3.5, and then Rohan, who's 1.5. My son is a Tolkien nerd, Lord of the Rings. All the kids are named after that. So, Lothlorien, Muriel is from the Silmarillion. And when he had a boy, he had a real issue. What's he gonna? He can't name him Frodo or Bilbo. I mean, so.
That would be good.
So they came up with
Rohan was a good choice.
Rohan, or men of nobility and courage. So that's
right.
So that's good. My middle son is in a serious relationship, living in LA, currently an unemployed actor because they're not doing anything out there. They have a great relationship with his significant other right now. And my youngest son is single, living in a 1-room apartment in Austin, Texas, and doing what, I don't know. But he's a great guy, very gifted, and the jury is out what he'll do and be someday. But those are our 3 boys. I'm with Paul. I pastored in Atlanta for 10 years, came back to Texas, planted a church together. We started our church with 6 people, Paul, Denise, and Kristen, and my wife Robin, and me, and Brady, my youngest. And so it's grown from those initial 6 people in these 18 years. Before COVID, we had a parish of about 8,000 to 10,000 people who would process through our church on a monthly basis. So we have no idea now, what our parish is. It's expanded to some degree, and I'm sure we've lost some people.
Yeah, Jim, what we really have no idea of is if they'll ever come back after staying at home and watching on TV.
Yeah. Well, since I haven't worked on Sunday in 11 weeks myself, and I'm going, this is not bad.
You might be changing your mind about something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think we'll find there are a lot of ministry leaders out there that are asking the same questions, like who is going to come back?
Yeah.
But we figure it out.
And
it was
do
built
I
once
want to
before.
go back? Right.
Do I want to go back?
Our wives come back? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
we want to just jump into this conversation about tough stuff parenting. And you both have grown kids. You've got grandkids. My kids are grown. Gina still has 2 at home. Well, you've got one that graduated this year. She's still at home, but then you have a 14 years old is how Connor is. Yeah. So we all have kids. We're all in the ministry. Your book, first, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about, okay, what was the genesis of this? This is really unique. And I'd love for the people out there just to hear why tough stuff parenting.
We planted our church in Frisco, Texas, which is about the fastest growing city in the United States in 2002. And when we got here and did deeper dive into demographics, there were more children birthed through 4 years of age in Frisco ISD, living in Frisco, than all the kids in grades K through 12.
Oh, wow.
So think about that.
Yeah.
We said, hey, if we're going to reach families and people who are far away from God, we have to do something to reach these young families with children. And so just out of that whole milieu of having so many kids in our church, and Cindy can tell you, there were seasons when there was like almost a one-to-one correlation. We'd have as many kids and students as we had adults in worship.
Yeah.
So out of that, we realized that we really needed to help parents know how to help their kids and equip their kids. And we did a message series entitled, "What Do I Tell My Kids About?" And so we had a series, what I tell my kids about tattoos, what I tell my kids about dinosaurs, what I tell my kids about having sex. Paul had surgery. He did one of those messages while he was on opioids from the doctor's prescription, and that tape has been lost, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Was that the dinosaur message? It was amazing.
Sure was. It was. I had taken a hydrocodone that morning before I preached because I just had surgery a few days before, and it hurt so badly I had to take something. And I got up there and I was talking about, all of a sudden I was looking down on myself. I was above myself physically, looking down on myself preaching, and I heard myself say, and then Mr. Noah opened the door of the ark and looked out, and he saw a brontosaurus and said, "Hey." And that was when I realized that I had said things I had never dreamed of that were not written down on this.
Oh man, that's good. It's too bad that's lost.
We did that series again later because issues changed, and we just realized that as we partner with Orange and parents really partnering with the church and helping kids be equipped to live a faithful life and make wise choices, and we wanting parents to be the primary spiritual influence in their children's lives, that it would be good to take some of those topics and turn those into a book so we can help parents know how to equip their kids in some of those very important issues that they're facing right now.
Yeah. You know, I think what I appreciate about the way that the book is laid out is it's very practical. I mean, you've got specific topics that you could choose from. So if you wanted to, you could read the book cover to cover if you wanted to, which I think would be beneficial for any parent. But you can also cherry pick. So if there's an issue that you're facing as a parent, you can go to that chapter and you can read, and it can help to equip you to have. I mean, ultimately, my impression is your goal is to equip a parent to have better conversations with their kids.
Absolutely.
Right. Which I think is that's powerful. But what I'm curious about is, what do you say if the audience that we're talking to right now are ministry leaders? These are people who work in the church. So these are people who they have kids in their home, and they just like they know that they're a parent like everybody else. I remember, if I can have room to share a story, I remember when my kids were really young. I can remember standing in the middle of our church on a Sunday morning, and parents are coming in, and they're checking their kids in, and I would have these conversations, and it didn't take me long when I was in ministry to realize that there's a perception that parents had about me as a parent. And they were strong assumptions, right? Like they assumed that I was a much better parent than they were. And I can remember constantly kind of deflecting that. Like, I'm really not any better parent than you are. And what I loved actually was usually when my toddler would have a meltdown, because then it was like this moment where I could go, yeah, I deal with the same thing you do, And sometimes I have to go, I don't know what to do. There was one time though, when my daughter was 9 years old, we were at an event for her school. We had gone to the book fair. She wanted an item at the book fair that I was not going to invest money in. I'll buy you a book, but I'm not buying that toy, She melted down in such a way that we carried her out of the building.
Oh, gosh.
And strapped her in her car seat. And I just remember at that moment thinking, I hope nobody recognizes me. And it was the first time ever as a parent where I thought, somebody is going to see what my kid did, and what will they think of me as a pastor? What will they think of me as a ministry leader if they see or they know what my kid did? That's what I want to talk about. That's what I would love to hear you speak into now. What do you say to the parent who right now just discovered that their kid has an addiction to porn?
There's that grenade.
Yeah, Paul, you're up.
Well,
Turn.
first off, Gina, that is a great application question. I'd like to go back to your original question right before that, though, or the assumed question, I think,
Yeah.
which is, how do you help adults in ministry who are parents recognize that just because they serve the church and serve Jesus does not mean that they're Jesus? And let me just start right there. Back in the day when Denise and I were newlyweds, then became new parents, unfortunately, there were no great books out other than James Dobson. His books ruled the day, and they were great. They were so helpful. And we used to listen to him on the radio, but there were no podcasts. There were no, Tim Kimmel didn't have books out there. You just couldn't find those kind of things. Orange didn't have a ministry. So we would listen to Dobson all the time and read his stuff. And I remember, and also Bruce Larson, who used to be up at First Pres, Seattle. And the insights that I got primarily from those guys were this, and this is what really nurtured Denise and me. And it was this. In our marriage and in our family, there is Father, Son, and Spirit. There's Denise and me, and there is our child. And if Denise and I, either one, try to play Father, Son, or Spirit, that kid is going to be confused. And so early on, we made the decision that we would, as much as we could, wear the hat of a parent and not wear the hat of a pastor or a pastor's wife or God.
Yeah.
And so Larson's phrase was, remind your child always that there is God, there is you as a parent, and there's the kid. He said, because if you don't, every kid already knows that their parents are kind of godlike anyway, because the parents say, hey, you messed up. I'm taking away your phone. You messed up. I'm grounding you. Well, that's what God does. God has power. And when parents have power over kids, it's easy for the kids to assume, oh God, my parents must be God. And that becomes a burden that a child can't bear, and it just confuses the categories. So early on, Denise and I made the decision that we would always communicate to our kids that we're their parents. We do have the charge, we do have the authority, but we are not God. Now, how that got translated out, Gina and Cindy, was that I had a lot of experience in going to my kids and saying, hey, you deserved some correction, and what you did was not right, but you did not deserve me yelling at you like that. So I want to ask you to forgive me. And the power in that was they realized that I had to go to God and that they had to go to God. And I was not God, and I was capable of not being perfect. And I don't mean my whole parenting style was to screw up and then ask my child to forgive me. What I'm saying is that we really worked hard at keeping everybody in their lane. And I'd love to say we did it perfect. We didn't, but I thank God for the insights of Bruce Larson and Jim Dobson back in the early days, because that's what got us started on how to communicate to our kids at a level that didn't put us in the God position. So we just wore the parent hat and tried never to wear the pastor hat, including when our oldest daughter said, I don't really want to go to church right now. We gave her permission not to. That was a hard decision. The good news is it didn't last long because she loved our church so much, she popped right back in. Yeah. But we had to, because I couldn't make her. I didn't want to make her go just because I was her pastor. I wanted to hear the fact that she didn't like the preacher, and that was me. And no, just kidding. But I had to just allow her to be herself.
I love that. I love that, because I think permission to allow our kids to have their own opinion about things. Like you said, your daughter didn't like your church. And I can see, I had a similar experience with my son when he was 16, my oldest. He came home one day and he said, I think I need to find another church. And my first thought was, wait, can he do that? Like,
is that legal?
Is that all right? Is that okay? Am I going to get fired for that? Like, what are people going to think? So that's a powerful response to that, is giving them that permission to make their own decision there.
Hey, I actually said that myself one day when I came home at one church. So
at your church?
Yeah, I need to find another church. So, hey, it happens to the best of us, right?
Right. Jim, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on either one of those questions? How are ministry leaders perceived as a parent versus?
It's really interesting. I know Paul did this with Denise, and I did this with Robin. Is I made the decision early on that I would never place any expectation on Robin that as a pastor's wife that I would place on any other woman in the church.
That's good.
And because of that fact, she is like a very unusual pastor's wife.
Yeah.
So, and Cindy can tell you stories, but she is beloved and she has served in our church, just like Denise, for 18 years every weekend. And yet no one would mistake her as a pastor's wife. But she does that because she wants to. By the same token, we made the decision also that we would not have an expectation that our kids would behave any differently than anybody else's kids, and not put that additional pressure on our kids when they were at church. And so when they messed up, like Brady, my youngest, was a negotiator early on. He was like 6 years old and graded choir, and he was misbehaving. And the lady said, Brady, if you do not settle down, I'm going to have to call your father. And Brady goes, well, you know who my father is, don't you? And she said, yes, I do. And he says, well, he's a very busy man. So the deal is, we just took it like any other. So we did our very best not to put any additional pressure on them. And that was
Same here.
that was the big picture approach. The porn thing is a really difficult issue today. And obviously I don't have time to go into the entire chapter, but one of the things I would encourage parents is to not panic and panic at the same time. That is, that kids today have the same curiosity that you and I had when we were growing up. I had that curiosity. In the beginning of the chapter that I wrote, outside of town, in a little fort that some boys had dug, there was a Playboy, and my friends and I would go check that out every now and then, right? So there's this natural curiosity that kids have about their bodies. Mm-hmm. What's to panic about is because of social media, and now that kids have a phone, is that our kids can get access to it much more quickly and much more of it, and much more novelty, which makes it even more addictive. And so very early on, they can get a huge dose of it way before their prefrontal cortex is really able to process what they're seeing and understanding, what their hormones are doing when they actually see something like this.
Yeah.
So it's just really important, I think, when we discover this, that we don't shame them, that we stop and we recognize that this is a natural part of growing up and this is God's gift. But then we have to have further conversations and discern where they are along the way. And then at that point in time, there may need to be some extra protections that we put in place and other conversations. But I would say, don't panic and panic in the same sense, because it's a very natural thing. But given what is accessible, you really need to be very concerned about what they could potentially be into.
Yeah.
Hey, Gina, let me respond to something too, if I may.
Yeah.
I was a pastor's kid myself. My dad was a pastor, and I was 10 when I got introduced to Playboy, which again, as Jim and I would tell you, we're just so thankful that that there was no online porn back in the day. But I was introduced at 10, and that ramped up to other magazines in our neighborhood. And I got so addicted to those magazines at 12 and 13 that I was going next door constantly because they had a stash of them. In fact, on one occasion, my dad and I were talking, and I left the house a while and went over. Nobody was home. They were out of town. I got into their house while they were out of town in order to feed my 13-year-old addiction. And I came back in, and I just must have looked guilty as heck, because my dad said, "Son, what's wrong?" And I just fumbled and faked, and I could, just the way he looked at me, I knew I needed to say it, and I told him. He stayed across the room, didn't approach me, and just said, and again, that's been 50 years, but he said something along the lines of, there was no shame, I'll tell you that. There was no shame, there was no humiliation, there was no guilt, there was no scolding, but I also knew that there was not acceptance as in, oh, that was a great thing to do, or this is a wonderful future for your life. And it was the whole spirit of this is difficult. This is difficult for you, and I hope you'll think about not going back over there. But I realize this is a challenge, and I remember that he could have made things far worse, and instead he graced me. And I had daughters, so in their generation, that was not an issue that I'm aware of. But I always will be grateful to my dad for that.
Yeah.
What a great example for you, Paul.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So there's a story in the book about partying.
Can't imagine what child that would be.
Well, this is just reality. And number one, I love the way that you unpack a good party. And I think it's so important for us to help leaders differentiate the difference between a good party and a party that's going to be harmful or hurtful. And so would you mind, Jim, sharing that story? And then let's just talk about, okay, so my kid gets caught at a party and it's Saturday night and I have to preach on Sunday morning.
Well, my youngest son was invited to a birthday party at a very exclusive subdivision in Atlanta. And I did not know this. He was in 8th grade. And it was actually, thankfully, it wasn't a Saturday night. It was a Friday night. And he had a basketball game the next day at noon against their biggest rival. And he said, Dad, can I go? And I said, well, you can if you promise that at midnight you'll steal away with a couple of your other teammates and y'all will go to bed and go to sleep. He said, Dad, I promise. Well, I get a call at 1:45 in the morning and he goes, Dad, I'm so sorry. I broke your trust. He said, I'm at this person's house and the police are here. Can you come and get me?
Oh. So
it's 1:45. It's a 45-minute drive to this house across Atlanta. I drive up. There are 5 Gwinnett County cop cars and a canine unit. I go inside, and it turns out that he and 2 of the guys. Well, first of all, there were 21 14-year-olds and only 2 parents supervising. I didn't know that. That's a very important part when your kids start going to parties and stuff. And so he and these 2 other guys left the party and started ding dong ditching in this exclusive neighborhood, ringing the doorbell and running, right? Yep. They did not have the sense not to know you don't go back to the same house 3 times in a row. On the 3rd time, a man and his 52-year-old man and his 34-year-old son came out of the house with a PVC pipe, caught one of the boys, and beat him. So now my son is on the lam, in all the ravines and the creeks in that area. After 3 hours, he thinks it's safe. He goes back to the party home, and the police are there, and he gets arrested for criminal trespassing. So it's, but the funny thing is, not funny, 2 days before, he was elected Mr. Spartan at his middle school as the best leader, top person, all this stuff. And so on Thursday, Rob and I are patting ourselves on the back like we are parents of the year.
Right.
And 24 hours later, he's arrested for criminal trespassing.
Now, Jim, it was better than that. Wasn't it a private Christian school and he was Mr. Christian?
Oh, no, that was later in the year at the superlative assembly. And all the awards are announced, and he's not top academically. He doesn't get any of the superlative stuff. And I'm turning to Robin going, Robin, man, he's going to buckle down. He's going to study. We got to do. And so they named the last award, and the last award is most Christ-like.
Oh.
And they go, Brady Johnson. And I'm going, crud. What can I say? He's the pastor's kid. You say, you better study more.
Right.
I mean, it's just, I lost all leverage at that point in time, so I couldn't say anything.
He was the most Christ-like felon of all your children.
Christ-like felon.
Yes. So I did learn from that experience certain things about parties, and there are things in the chapter you can take a look at. But obviously, as a parent, you want to be aware of what's going on. I do talk about the fact that if you grew up in many churches, when I grew up in, our ethic is primarily the slippery slope ethic. and that we're going to not let our kids do anything that might eventually lead to fun, which could be sinful. And I tell a story in there. I didn't really understand how to celebrate under God until I was in my 30s. And I think teaching your children how to celebrate under God's reign and in appropriate ways and for appropriate things is really important. And many times we don't want our kids to have fun or really enjoy themselves because we think they're gonna take the next step, they're gonna do something wrong. So that's one of the major premises of the chapter, is to define what is a healthy party and a good party, and when does a party turn bad.
So talk to the audience about your and Robin's response. And Paul, I'm sure you've had opportunity with the girls, although I know they're both awesome. All 5 of your kids are amazing. But talk about the next day and your parenting moment together as a couple and also as people in ministry. It's like, how are we going to mitigate this?
Yeah. Well, the next day was not the best day of parenting because he still had the basketball game. And the big deal for us is, are we going to let him play or not? And the deal was, well, he clearly shouldn't. But if he didn't, he's also hurting the team. And I caved. And I let him play. And I should not have done that. And it was a big game. I'm sorry. It was, and so I did not do that well. And and one of the principles I've learned, it's not in the book, I don't think, but out of the principles that I've kind of developed now is one of my new one is this: underparent your first child and overparent your last child. And that is, I parented too easy because the third child is like, you're tired, you got so many other things going on, and we did not hold him as accountable as regularly and as often as we should have. So I was not a very good example the next day, Cindy. I'm sorry.
No, I think people need to hear it.
Yep.
Right.
But I'd love to unpack that a little bit, though. Why, Jim? Why would you say that your decision to let him play was not the right decision?
Because I think I kept him from experiencing the full weight of the consequence of his poor decision. And so I may have been a precursor of a helicopter dad.
Okay.
So if I had it to do over again, I would have said, no, you cannot play the game.
Yeah.
So he would have felt the full weight of breaking trust with me. But the thing about Brady, he's like one of the most lovable kids, and he can repent really well. And he can say he's sorry, and you can say, oh, that's okay. So yes. And Paul can attest to all these things because our families have been together for a long time. So.
Well, I think that's one thing that can be missed sometimes that we can lose sight of, is that the full weight, I suspect, correct me if I'm making too many assumptions here. There's a weight that came with breaking trust with you as a dad, as a father. And that's a weight that you wanted him to feel. There's also a weight of the peer pressure from his teammates that could have been a positive impact, hard one, nonetheless, in that he has to sit on the bench and watch his team, play without him. And the pressure of that could be a long-term positive experience. But it's easy as parents. I know I'm guilty of that, of maybe saving my kid from experiencing that what I would call as a healthy peer pressure.
That is the challenge, I think, in today's world, especially for parents.
Yeah.
There's that spectrum between protecting your kids and then preparing them. And I think we probably overprotect too long rather than letting them fully experience things and learn through that process so they are prepared. They can fail when they're still in the household, and failures when you're in elementary school aren't as costly as they are when you're a young adult, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Paul, do
I
you
love
have
that.
anything to add?
Cindy, what I would add would be on that very last point. Our oldest, Carrie, was an easy child. Not all children are. She was an easy child. She would tell you if she were here that her rebellion days were in college. And there are many times I was really happy not to know what she was doing or where she was. But precious girl, and just, I just loved her to death. That little relationship of a daddy and a daughter was solid. And again, Denise and I heard early on that we should allow them to make mistakes while they're still under our wing, and not when they're after they've already been pushed out of the nest. So we made a decision her summer before her freshman year that we would give her curfew that was increasingly expansive over the next 4 years, so that when she went to college, it would not be new to her. Total freedom would not be new to her. So we decided for ninth grade, she would have a 10 p.m. weeknight curfew and an 11 p.m. Weekend curfew. And then in 10th grade, it would be 11 p.m. weeknight and midnight weekend. And then her junior year, it would be midnight and 1. And then her senior year, she'd have no curfew. But she would have to call us. And I'm glad we did that. It was a great experience of giving her gradually loosening ties so that she could. And again, her senior year, I can't tell you the number of times that we woke up at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Denise and I didn't go, "Where's Carrie?" And we'd run out and go look at the room. Bed was empty. We go, "Oh crap, where is she?" And then, we'd call her on her cell, and she'd say, "I told you, I'm over at Sarah's. I'm over at my boyfriend's. We're watching a movie with whatever. We're right here, just like I told you we'd be." Oh, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you run away and you become, a terribly immoral human. And it was a great experience for Denise and me to learn to trust her. And she she deserved that trust, and she was repaid. She repaid us, and we repaid her with more trust. And then she went to college. And again, I think it's possible to argue, I couldn't do it other than anecdotally, but I think it's possible to argue that the reason that she only rebelled a little bit in college and was quick to return to the Lord when she got out of college was because there was not that much to rebel against. I remember when she came home from college her freshman year, we were walking around we went on a walk one day after her old high school. We just walked the track, and she said, "Dad, can we talk?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You remember how we couldn't drink in our house when I was growing up?" I said, "Well, we didn't drink a lot. We're trying to make up for that in a healthy way, responsible way now that we're back in Texas." And she said, "Well, Daddy, I have learned to drink, and I love it. And I go bar hopping on a regular basis most nights here in Nashville. And are you okay with that?" I said, "I am. Just be responsible, and please don't drive." She goes, "We don't. We're always responsible." And she goes, "It goes late sometime." I said, "Just don't tell me. I don't want to know where you are. But I love you." And I really believe that there was not that much to rebel against by the time she got to college. And so her rebellion, honestly, was more along the lines of just that. It was going out and doing what most of her high school kids did, but she didn't do because I was a pastor and she was respectful of me. I know you're going to ask the question, but what if she'd gotten stone drunk and showed up Sunday morning, with a hangover? I don't know. I didn't experience it. I'm sorry. I can't give your listener great response there. But I will say that it was a good decision on our part, and she handled it very well. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. I love the idea, though, that the prevailing concept of giving them freedom while they're living in your home, so that you can teach them you can guide them through what it looks like to actually handle that freedom. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
So if you would allow us, I'd love to kind of pivot the conversation for the last couple minutes. As we're taping this, we're in basically the second week of riots and protesting, rightfully so. I'd love, you guys have a really great chapter in your book about racism. I would love you guys I just want to put that out there, and I want to hear what you would say to parents, to ministry leaders in this season right now.
Jim wrote that chapter on racism. He preached the message on it. He called Ferguson about 5 years ago. Powerful message. great chapter. JJ, why don't you do that? And then I have something I'd like to follow up with on the end on that.
Sure, be glad to. Well, clearly I wrote it initially then and I've actually updated in a blog post that I sent out this past Monday. And one of the things that I'm realizing in my own life, and I think a lot of people who are in my demographic, maybe a little bit younger, we are finally coming to understand a kind of an embedded racial insensitivity. As Sunday at church, I kind of confessed up front before we prayed for the situation in the United States. I grew up in Midland, Texas, predominantly white collar town. I went to Robert E. Lee High School. Our mascot was the Rebels, and every time we scored a touchdown, they played Dixie, and a big Jeep with a Confederate flag drove up and down the track. So even though I did not feel like I'm a racist, that is, this racial insensitivity is deeply embedded within me because of simply my experiences growing up. And I think a lot of us are that way. And I begin the chapter, I'll talk about just the setup because I think this would be really helpful for parents. I think one of the things that would help us as parents, first of all, and I think this is one of the issues that we as parents have to work out before we can really help our children, right? If we haven't addressed this in our own life, we really can't help our kids. And so I think there are three assumptions. I say we assume too much when it comes to this race issue. The first one is this: we assume way too much about a person's appearance when we first see them. And that's a very natural thing to do. Our brain processes people that are new when we see them, and we run that against our memory about who is safe and who is not safe and what they're going to do or might do to us. And we have to really help our kids know. We have to help tell ourselves we cannot prejudge someone on the basis of simply their physical appearance. So we assume too much about that. We also assume that other people's worlds are just like ours.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time, and I think we all do. We just assume that everybody's family was just like ours, and everybody's experience is our experience. But as I say in the book, the United States was a culture built by Indo-Europeans for Indo-Europeans. In fact, on Brene Brown's Instagram, there's a little Post-it note that she has that says this: the system is not broken. The system is built this way.
Yep.
And that is, I don't think it's not malicious, I don't think, in some sense. It was just, that was who was here, and that's how they built it. But of course, we mistreated Native Americans, and then we brought slavery. But our culture is built for Indo-European, white, Western Europeans primarily. And so for me, I've experienced very few obstacles. The ramp for success in my life was downhill. But for many people of color, the ramp for success in our life is uphill, and there are a lot of obstacles. And because I don't see them, I assume they're not there.
Right.
And that's a part of our blindness. And then the third assumption, I think this is the one that where a lot of us get stuck, is because I assume that because I'm not racist, that I want to be open and everything, that's all I have to do. That if I'm not a racist, that I'm good. But, when you really understand what the nature of justice is in the Old Testament, justice is not just doing the right things. It's making wrong things right again. And I love one pastor I quoted, I can't remember his name, in a message a couple of weeks ago, is that, most of us are not at fault for the injustices that are going on around us right now. But that does not mean that we're not responsible for them.
Ooh.
And under God, to act justly means that we work, that we have a sense of responsibility, that we are to make these wrong things right. And so I'm learning that a lot right now. We're processing that at Preston Trail. And so those are three assumptions I think that parents make that they need to process before they can truly begin to have conversations with their kids.
That is really good.
I just finished, I'm going through the second time now, an older book by Henry Cloud called 9 Things you really must do to succeed in love and life. It's so good. It's like if you could have him, it's like if you could be in his counseling office at all times, Cindy, and you're able to just take around his best thoughts and say, what about this? What about this? Because all he's doing is giving examples of counselees, most of whom fought through tough issues to really grow. And he goes through these 9 things. Well, one of them, I was so surprised. It's called Hate Well. Well, come on now. We always tell people don't hate, right? Love's the opposite of hate, blah, blah, blah. Well, he reminds us that in Proverbs 6:16, we read, there's 6 things the Lord hates, actually 7. And I began thinking, what do I really hate in life? And I have to be honest, since I was a child, I've hated racism. And I don't know why, but it is just, I do too, is my father. He was a champion for integration and just preached in Mississippi in the mid 1950s on the equality of the races before God. And so I know I got that from him. What I didn't get was his courage, because here I am now 64, and I have never stood up in the same way that he did. But I do know that I had that modeled for me. And so I've always hated the thought that one person is better than another just because of skin color. And so that has never been in my mind. And to follow up with Jim here, therefore, for decades, I've assumed that since I've preached against racism, since I don't personally feel like I'm a racist in any ways, therefore, I'm not a part of the problem.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize was that I have been zero part of the solution either. And I thought that not being part of the problem meant that therefore I was part of the solution. And what I've come to realize is that, number one, I would have no idea if I'm a part of the solution or problem because I'm white and a white male. And I've benefited from every single possible benefit that comes that way in America. I didn't ask for it. I just got born that way. And I now have a responsibility to listen to those who are in the midst of any form of racism and learn from them. So I just was asked recently by an African-American friend of mine here who's a pastor in a church if I would speak on one of his devotionals coming up on a time of repentance and remorse. And I said, no, I can't right now. He said, why? He said, you're one of the few pastors that's ever talked to me about race relations. I said, because I've done nothing. I said, I have nothing to say. I need to shut up and listen to you and to all my other, and Jim's and my other Black friends or friends of color who are in ministry. And you tell us what we don't see. And if I listen long enough, and if I can get inside your skin long enough, then I can actually respond in such a way that can be helpful. But I got nothing to say. Biblically, I can absolutely tell you that God is not a respecter of persons. Acts chapter 10 is the chapter. I can tell you that Jesus was a despised Jew. He was not a blonde-haired, blue-eyed California surfer guy. He was a Jewish person, and that anti-Semitism has been rampant since going back hundreds and hundreds of years, at least to Pharaoh and Moses, if not before. So I know that. But until I can listen and be in this posture of learning, and that's where Jim and I are now. We're in a posture of learning from others. We're going to a prayer meeting tomorrow night on the steps of Collin County Courthouse, sponsored by the pastor of one of the largest Baptist Black churches here. We're going with him and a bunch of others to pray and to deal with this issue. Friday afternoon, we're having coffee with one of our favorite Liberian American pastors and just saying, tell us what's going on. What do we need to know? So I know what God hates. I know what Jim and I hate. I know what so many Christians hate. But that doesn't mean we're a part of the solution. And that's our conviction. We just have got to not be inactive anymore and find out the right thing. But even there, we can't prescribe that for ourselves. We got to be in a posture of listening and learning.
Paul, that's powerful. And I think that is probably one of the best steps that we as leaders can take, is to listen, to learn, and then to discover what are the steps that we can take to be a part of the solution. And the one thing that I keep saying over and over and over again is silence isn't an option. Silence simply is not an option. We have to be a part. We can't stay neutral. Neutral is not an option in this scenario. We have to be a part of the solution. In the chapter, though, I didn't underline it, and I was trying to find it just a minute ago as you were sharing. Jim, one of the things that you said, if I remember the chapter correctly, is you actually confess that you didn't teach on this on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
So in light of that, and in light of where we are, what would you say to teaching pastors right now about that? What would your encouragement be?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Gina. That's wonderful.
Hey,
Sorry about that.
it's two of us, buddy. It's two of us.
There's that.
There's that.
There's that. One of the primary reasons here in Frisco, it is very monolithic in culture. I mean, it's very much a young, growing town with young kids, and it really, for us, it wasn't an issue, right? And so my perception was it didn't really come up on our radar as an issue here. So I think that just is a test to our racial blindness, that it really was an issue for some people here and we were not seeing it. So I think it's very difficult right now, unless you were just in total denial, to see that this is an issue. And one of the things that I'm most encouraged about is that I believe that America has kind of hit a tipping point in this whole issue of racial injustice. And so we're having conversations with our elders, we're having conversations with people about these things that we have never had before. So I think if you're ever going to speak on racism, then now is the time. And here's the thing, I wrote another blog post this morning, put it on my Facebook page, and I signed on to Black Lives Matter, terminology. Paul and I had not done that. One of the primary reasons is, and I'll talk about that in the blog post, but we have a lot of people here that we want to offend people so they stop listening, and so all that kind of rationalization we do, right? But the thing is, I came out to that today, and the response of our people has been like 99.9% positive. That is, if you're a pastor or a leader right now, you may be surprised that your people are way ahead of you in thinking about this, and especially if they have young kids at home. They're young kids. I'm finding out that the college-age kids are teaching our parents in our church right now. So it is time, and quite frankly, you may be surprised that your church is actually just waiting on you to say something. And I don't think you can go wrong right now to start addressing this issue.
So good. Paul, one of the things I just want to say thank you for your statement about, you said, I'm not talking about it right now because I'm listening and I'm learning.
Yeah.
And I found myself even just this morning, just feeling so heavy. And yet, I see all of my friends posting very pithy things on all of the social media platforms. And I'm like, I can't do it yet. And it's not because I don't believe and because I don't want to stand up. And I've posted a couple things, but I just want to learn. I just want to learn. And I'm one of the things that's been so refreshing for Gina and I, we've had more conversations about racism since we started this, even before this last wave with George Floyd that hit, then I've had in a consecutive 6 months.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for it. The other thing that, we live in Colorado and our church is predominantly brown.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting to me because racism comes in all different colors. Our friend Phyllis, who's been on this show, who's a Korean American, she said, I'm dealing with my own form of racism that I realize has been passed down. You talk about biases in the chapter 2, and how we adopt these biases, not even realizing that, and even understanding why we believe what we believe. And so if nothing else, man, my prayer is that we'll just continue to ask questions and get curious and then listen. That's a good word, listen. Guys, thank you so much for being here with us. We have just a couple of quick questions. The lightning round. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yes.
Yes.
We'll find out.
Gina,
Am I starting?
You kick us off.
I got to pull up my questions. Okay, how about we do this? Paul, you answer first, then Jim, you go next. Let's start with an easy one. We'll have an easy one out there. Favorite meal?
Fish tacos.
Ooh, fish tacos. Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Sour cream chicken enchiladas at Petra's.
Yum.
In McKinney, yes.
Good.
That sounds amazing.
All right. You ready for the next one?
Come on.
Favorite all-time album. And I use the word album.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah.
did.
Yeah, Abbey Road, especially the second side.
Oh,
It's the best 14 minutes of music ever written.
second side. I love how you specify that. Like you lift the needle up, you flip it over, you put the needle back down again. Right. There you go.
Exactly.
14 minutes. Did you hear all that detail? All right.
Go, Jim.
The Eagles when hell freezes over.
Yes. I love the Eagles.
I know, right?
I know.
Those are good.
All right. Okay. Well, what's on your nightstand right now? What are you reading?
Yeah.
I'm reading Harry Potter #2 with one of my daughters.
All right.
And we've seen it and all that, but we're reading that. I am reading a book on the history of Christian theology. Almost finished. I'm on the critique that feminist theology has offered to Christian theology. I'm on that part right now. I'm getting ready to start a new book by Dan Ryland on courageous leader.
Good stuff. I'd love to hear about that second one that you just.
I know. Who wrote that?
Alistair McGrath.
Oh, there you go. Okay. I'll let you read it first, Cindy, and then you can give me your notes on it.
Yeah.
Jim, how about you? What are you reading right now?
Yeah, this is terrible. I have a book, and I couldn't remember the name of it. It's a new biography on James Garfield. It's called Destiny of the Republic. And so I read to my wife at night before we go to sleep. I'm usually good for 2 to 3 pages.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually have Hamilton on my bedside table. You know, it's this thick.
Wow.
And I'm through page 400 just at night. So, but once we went and saw Hamilton, I lost my motivation to finish. You can only read so long through the Federalist Papers.
Right.
Right.
Oh, man.
Especially at night.
Yes.
That's kind of brutal, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is one that we love to ask. What's your favorite beverage?
New Age white wine with ice cubes and a spritz of lime, or frozen margarita with no salt.
Ooh.
I
Frozen
know.
margarita.
They both sound great right now.
Have y'all had New Age before?
I don't think
No, I don't think so.
Girl, that is one biblical summer drink. You need to work on that.
All right, then. As long as it's biblical.
Better than honey and nectar.
Jim, how about you?
Well, we have a COVID discovery of a bottled margarita. It's called Cayman Jack.
Really?
Yeah, it's really, really good. But so that's just kind of standard. But we have a common friend who's become a connoisseur of bourbon, and so he invites us over once a week and shares like really expensive bourbon and whiskey with a group of about 5 or 6 of us, and we sit out and we talk about life and theology and have just a couple of sips. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. I would frankly, one of the reasons why Paul and I started a non-denominational church is so we could do that and tell people about it.
That's right.
right.
You don't have to be a closet drinker.
No,
Yeah.
we don't.
So Gina and I both love brown liquor.
Yep. We do. We've been known to have a a virtual whiskey together. So we
with our husbands. Yeah.
yeah.
So on Zoom.
It works.
Because Gina's in Tennessee and I'm here. So yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow.
okay, Gina,
Think of
last
that way.
question. This is your
Last
favorite
question. It is my favorite one. Do you have a tattoo?
No. No. My daughter has 2 or 3, but my oldest doesn't at all, and I don't.
You don't have one. Jim, how about you?
No, but if I had one, I know what it would be.
What's
Okay.
that?
It would be 1/99. And
You
it's
just
on
chose
the-
one.
on the-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
I love that. So then the question is, where would you put it? Like, are you thinking shoulder? Are you thinking ankle? Top of your foot?
Cool.
I don't know. Some people do that.
I could never
I'll do that.
Hey, listen, I'm 65. I can't bend over far enough to see my ankle anymore. What are you talking about? Probably put it on my wrist right here where I
Oh, that's perfect.
I do have a funny tattoo story if you have time. It's really short.
Yeah.
Go.
So back in the day when we did our very first What Do I Tell My Kids About series, which was the basis for the book Tough Stuff Parenting, Jim did the message on tattoos because that was a big thing in the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5. So my daughter Kristen, who was in high school at the time, heard that message, and like the next week she called me one day on her cell phone while she's driving. I said, "Hey, what's up?" She goes, "I'm going to get a tattoo." I said, "No, you're not. So we haven't talked about that." She goes, "Jim said I could." I said, No, Jim said talk to your parents and obey your parents. She goes, "No, I'm going to get it." I said, "Kristen." She goes, "Daddy, I'm going to tell you what it's going to be. First off, I want you to just put your thumb and your finger together, and that's how big it's going to be." Because I said, "Don't make it big." So I do this in my mind. I'm thinking, that's okay. And she goes, "Second," she goes, "it's going to be praying hands." I said, "Oh, that's so sweet." So I'm picturing a little thing like this, praying hands. Okay, Cindy. She comes home, and it covers from her top of her shoulder almost down to her elbow. I said, "Kristen, that's your whole arm." She goes, "I told you to put your thumb and your finger together." So that's been my story of my life. That's how Kristen gets things, and I never understand it. She still does that.
Smart girl.
Come on, Dad.
Smart
Right
girl.
there.
That's
It's
amazing.
So sweet.
We have a similar story with our daughter. She came home.
This Paige?
Yeah, Paige. So she came home, and she's heard me say this, so it's okay. But she came home on her graduation party day, and the whole family's there, and my mom and dad are there, and she comes in so excited. She goes, "Mom, do you want to see what I gave myself for graduation?" And I'm like, "Yes, do I?" And she turned around, and it was a beautiful piece of art that she drew, but the guy didn't shrink it, and it is this big and go on her lower back, and it goes all the way down one cheek, and I'm just
Wow.
and my mom, my sweet mom, standing behind me, and she says, "You're either gonna need to get a really great job so you can have that removed one day, or you are going to hate that when you're old."
Well, then
Time will tell.
there's that.
There's that.
There's that.
There's that. That could be a whole other segment. So much. And just one more time, I just can't recommend this book enough.
Yeah.
Tough Stuff Parenting. I'm assuming they can find it on Amazon, almost anywhere.
Yep. Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Written by Paul Basden and Jim Johnson. Get on Amazon today, and you can have it tomorrow.
Yep.
So you will need this book, I promise you, if you're a parent. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
What a treat. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're just thrilled to be able to have you here and hear about this book, but also to have all that good wisdom poured into some leaders out there. So
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. And if you ever want to have a guest appearance at one of your brown drink Zoom calls, you got my email address.
okay, I will.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll make that happen. All right,
That's
guys.
awesome.
Thank you
guys.
so much again for being here.
You
Thanks.
bet.
And Cindy, thank you for the years you spent at our church, for the footprint that you put down, and for all the things that are growing beautifully out of your investment here. We're grateful to you. And if you love Gina, we do too. She must be a great gal. Gina, thank you so much for hosting this with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Our best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.